Okay, recording is ready and let's start talking about the chemical basis of life. So, as mentioned, in order for us to understand yung complex structures of the human organism, we should first have a good understanding of the foundations of a human organism. And it all begins with the smallest level of organization, which are chemicals. So, in this discussion, we will be talking about the organic and inorganic compounds that are important to sustain life. We're going to be talking about the chemical compositions of the different cell organelles because in your next discussion, you'll be talking about cell anatomy already. We'll be talking about buffers, salts, bases, and acids, and then later on the carbonic acid and bicarbonate buffer system, which will eventually play out as we go along through the semester. So let's define some important terms. When we say chemistry, this is the scientific discipline which talks about atomic composition, structure of substances, and the reactions that all of these things undergo. So, di ba, in your junior high chemistry, you talked about elements, you even talked about atoms, specifically the parts of an atom like the proton, the neutron, the electron, which later on I will ask you about. And of course, you even talked about balancing equations, diba, your stoichiometry, and the different bonds and the different reactions that all these chemicals undergo. So basically, it's the same as how we studied it in junior high to how we will study it here in your Human Anatomy and Physiology. Now, when we talk about chemistry, when you put them together, it will eventually form your matter. So, from our elementary definition, matter is anything that occupies space and has mass. And there are three types of matter: your solid, your liquid, and your gas. Now, two important words when we talk about matter in chemistry include mass and weight. Now, a lot of people would interchange the two kasi hindi natin alam yung difference between mass and weight. So the goal today is for you to understand the actual difference between the two. So by definition, mass is the amount of matter in an object. Okay? Mass is the amount of matter in an object. So weight, on the other hand, is the gravitational force that is acting upon an object. So how do we apply this for us to better understand? We know that the gravitational force on Earth is around 9.1 point something, right? In your general science, you studied that as well. So the gravitational pull on Earth is different from the gravitational pull on the moon. That's why if you look at the videos by Neil Armstrong and all these people who have gone to the moon, they could basically float. There is actually like zero gravity in outer space, and in different planets in the world or in the universe rather, ay iba-iba. There are different gravitational forces. So meaning I could be like 100 kilos here on Earth, but that may not necessarily be true when I am on Mars or when I am on Jupiter or when I am in Uranus. Diba? Kasi iba-iba or they have different gravitational pulls. But when we talk about mass, wherever I am in the universe, my mass is a constant because the amount of matter I have is the same. It does not change. It does not change wherever I am. It is the same. Unlike yung weight, it is dependent on the gravitational force acting upon an object. So chemicals and matter, they would actually have that mass and weight. And they are usually different kasi iba yung pinag-uusapan natin. Mass is the amount of matter, while weight is the gravitational force acting upon that object or that person. So these chemicals are actually compounds, and they are made up of elements. No? So elements, these are the ones that you see on the table, diba? The table of elements. And elements are defined as the simplest form of matter. Okay, the simplest form of matter. And some elements would include your carbon, your hydrogen, your oxygen, your nitrogen, calcium, potassium, sodium, and chloride. These are just some of them. And there are a lot of them if you if you review or if you look at your table of elements again. Now, elements may be the simplest form of matter, but actually elements are made up of smaller substances called atoms. Okay? So atoms are the smallest particle of an element. And as mentioned, your atom is made up of protons, electrons, and neutrons. So do you see the organization? Matter is made up of elements, and elements is made up of atoms, and atoms are made up of protons, electrons, and neutrons. So can we have a review? What are protons again? Anybody? Dr. Jaden Martin?
Yung proton po yung meron pong one electrical charge po, Doc.
They are positively charged. Ayan, they are positively charged particles. How about your electrons? Dr. Santiago?
Negatively charged particle po.
Okay, and your neutrons? Dr. Pango?
No electrical charge po.
Very good. They are neutrally charged. So, by looking at the appearance of it, it would appear like this. Your atom would appear like this. Ayan. So, this is an atom. It has a nucleus and it has an electron cloud. Okay? So, this is the same as this one. All right? It has a nucleus and it has an electron cloud. Now, your nucleus is made up of your protons, which are the positively charged particles, and your neutrons, which are the neutrally charged particles. Okay? And commonly, they are equal in number. Okay? Commonly, they are equal in number. So, kung ilan yung protons, that's how many neutrons you have as well. Okay? And surrounding your nucleus are several electrons. Okay? Do you still remember what we call these electrons on the outermost shell? Starts with the letter V. Go ahead, Dr. Maragmen.
Valence electrons po.
Very good. Your valence electrons, di ba? Those are the ones on the outermost shell. And in order for your valence electrons to be complete, how many should there be? Yes, Dr. Inigo Martin.
8 electrons po, sir, according to octet rule po.
Correct. Your octet rule would tell us that there should be 8 electrons in your outermost shell, or 8 valence electrons in order for it to be called a valence electron. Very good. You guys still know your chemistry. That's very good. Now, this is just a summary slide in order for us to remember the definitions I just gave. Now, putting together everything we have already mentioned, we would encounter diagrams or images like this one. There you go. So commonly, when we look at elements, of course, we have the atomic symbol, which is the abbreviated 2-letter symbol for the different names of the elements, right? So this one is, what element do we have here? Doctors, let me ask for another person. Dr. Oliva.
Sir, helium po.
Very good, that's helium. So usually when we see elements like this, there are 2 numbers. There's a number above it and there's a number below it. The number above it is called your atomic number. And by definition, the atomic number is the number of protons in each atom. So, di ba, elements, as mentioned earlier, the smallest particle of a matter is made up of atoms. And atoms are made up of your protons, neutrons, and electrons. So, the atomic number tells us the number of protons present in that element. Okay? While the number at the bottom is called the atomic mass. And by mass, this is the amount of matter present in an object. So, how come it is 4? Because your atomic mass is the number of protons and neutrons in each atom. And as mentioned earlier, commonly, your protons is the same number as your neutrons. Diba? So basically, your atomic mass is commonly just a double of your atomic number. So if this is 2, then this is 4. If we have 6 here, then this will be 12. Okay? Kasi nga, commonly po, equal yung number ng protons and neutrons natin. So let's put this to the test. Let me give you another example. Here you go. So we have here your oxygen. And what is the atomic number of oxygen, guys? Let's ask Dr. Perez.
8 po, Doc.
And that means,
That means po, Doc, that the mass number po is 16.
okay. So basically, ang hinihingi ko ng Dr. Perez is that 8 means there are 8 protons in that element. But you're also correct, no? It means also that the atomic mass is 16, which means there are 8 protons and 8 neutrons in that element. Okay? Clear so far, guys? All right. Hopefully, everything is clear. How about for sodium? Sodium naman has an atomic number of 11, which means there are 11 protons. And the atomic mass is 22, which means 11 protons and 11 neutrons. Okay? So hopefully you will not forget that anymore. Now, we're done talking about protons and neutrons. Now let's talk about your electrons. And your electrons will be very important when we talk about chemical bonding, no? So chemical bonds, as we all know, is the union of atoms, na pagsasama-sama ng mga atoms. So, chemical bonding happens when your outermost electrons, which is, as you mentioned, called your valence electrons, are either transferred or shared between your atoms. So, there are 3 types of chemical bonding: your ionic, your covalent, and your hydrogen bond. So, may mga ano pa, no? There is also such a thing called single bond, double bond, triple bond, but I will leave that to your chemistry to discuss it. So for the sake of our discussion, we'll just be talking about the differences of these 3 chemical bonds, okay? So let's start with your ionic bonding. So una, we should first understand what ions are. So when we say ions, these are atoms with a charge. So when we say charge, you see a positive or a negative sign following the atomic symbol. Like here, you have your sodium, and then it has a positive sign. So this is a sodium ion. Okay, this is a sodium ion. In here, we have chlorine, and you have a negative sign here. So this is a chloride ion. All right. So when your chemicals or your atomic symbols are followed by a positive or a negative sign, that means they are charged atoms. And how do they become charged? They gain that positive or negative symbol through the donation or the gain of an electron. Okay? When an electron is donated or gained, then they develop or they eventually become charged. So let's say your sodium. Your sodium became positive because it donated an electron. Remember, what charge is your electron, positive or negative? Electrons are
Negative po.
Negative po.
okay, negatively charged. Agree. So, when you donate a negative charge, you lose negativity. Diba? Nagbigay ka ng negative sa iba. So, nabawasan ka ng pagka-negative. Thus, the sodium became positively charged because it lost its negativity. While your chloride ion here, it gained an electron. So, nakatanggap siya. It received negativity. Thus, it became a negatively charged ion. Okay? So, hopefully that's clear. Don't worry, later on, I will show you another diagram which will make you visualize what we mean by it. So, ionic bonding happens when there is attraction between 2 oppositely charged ions, such as your sodium ion and your chloride ion. One is positively charged and the other is negatively charged. So that attraction between the 2 would form an ionic bond, and it formed sodium chloride, okay, or table salt. So in order for us to better visualize, let me show you this. Yan. So we have here sodium, your sodium atom. So it has 1 valence electron. 1 valence electron. While your chloride has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 valence electrons. So it would be energy saving, energetically favorable for sodium to just donate its single electron instead of trying to gain 7 electrons. Do you get what I mean? It would be easier or more energetically favorable for sodium to just donate its single valence electron instead of trying to get 7 to complete its octet rule, or to comply to the octet rule. On the other hand, your chlorine atom, it would be easier, or again, more energetically favorable for it to gain an electron rather than to donate 7 of its electron. Okay? So in this diagram, we see here that the sodium atom donated 1 of its electrons to chlorine rather, and then it therefore formed a sodium ion, giving it a positive charge here. And your chlorine atom became a chloride ion, completing its valence electrons and having a negative charge. So what do we call in chemistry positively charged ions? Starts with the letter C. Dr. Sagum.
Cation po.
Very good. That's your cation. And what do we call negatively charged ions? Dr. Nebriha.
Anion po, Doc.
Ion. Very good. So naalala pa natin. And because they are now oppositely charged, there will be attraction between the two, and that will be an ionic bond forming your sodium chloride. Any questions so far?
None po, Doc.
All right, let's continue. Now we have your covalent bonding. Covalent bond is different, very different from your ionic bonding, in the sense that covalent bond occurs when atoms share. So this is the key word here. In covalent bond, atoms share their electrons. They do not gain, they do not donate, rather they share their electrons. What's special about your covalent bond is that this is the bond that is most stable. It is the strongest of all the 3 bonds, no? And one example of your covalent bond is the bonding of the 2 hydrogen molecules and the oxygen atom. So instead of losing or gaining their electrons, they decided to share it. That's why here, if you count, your oxygen will now have from 6 valence electrons, it now has 8, because hydrogen and oxygen shared their electrons to each other. Okay. Now, anyway, we'll go to that later. So now what I want you to understand is that there are 2 types of covalent bond. These are polar covalent bonds and nonpolar covalent bonds. Now, what's the difference between the two? Polar covalent bonds happen when there is unequal sharing of electrons, while nonpolar covalent bond happens when electrons are equally shared. So basically, it's the basis of polar and nonpolar bonding is how the electrons are shared. Kung equal, nonpolar. Unequal, polar. No? And of course, when you have substances or atoms and elements that are bonded by polar covalent bonds, then you call them polar molecules. Obvious naman, di ba? No-brainer. When you use a polar covalent bond, then it will create a polar molecule. And when you use a non-polar covalent bond, it will produce a non-polar molecule. So how do we define the two? Polar molecules are those that have an asymmetrical electrical charge. Kasi nga, why asymmetrical? Because there is also unequal sharing of electrons. While your non-polar molecules, they have a symmetrical electrical charge because the electrons are shared equally. Okay, do not worry. I'll show you images in order for you to visualize what we mean by this. Let's start with your non-polar covalent bonds. Here you go. So in this non-polar covalent bond, we have 2 hydrogen atoms. And each one of them would have 1 valence electrons on their outermost shell. So what they did in order to form a bond is that they shared their electrons. They shared with each other. Again, electrons are negatively charged. So at the point where they share their electrons, it will form a negativity around this area. And that is shown in this image because the red part, which is it symbolizes the negativity, is found in the middle. Okay? And the other parts of that hydrogen atom without the electron would give off a positive end. Okay? That's why this is color blue over here, because on the ends of these two hydrogen atoms is a positive end. Okay? Kuha, nasa gitna yung kanilang negativity because the electrons are here, and because yung negativity is centered on a specific side, the other side of that atom became positively charged. Kuha? Clear?
Clear po, sir.
Yes po,
Alright.
Doc.
So as you can see here, they are mirror images of each other. Diba? This hydrogen atom is a mirror image of this hydrogen atom, similar to how this hydrogen atom is a mirror image of this one. So when they are mirror images of each other, that is a symmetrical electrical charge. Thus, we know that this is a nonpolar covalent bond. On the other hand, we have the polar covalent bond. And one of the most common examples of it is the formation of water. So again, we have here your oxygen atom. And originally, your oxygen atom has 6 valence electrons. No? So 6, and then your hydrogen atom would share their single valence electron with oxygen. So ayan, again, there is negativity here and another negativity here. And then yung labas ng ating oxygen is positively charged rather, and the other end of this hydrogen is positively charged. But the other end of your oxygen remains negatively charged because there are still valence electrons on those sides. So as you can see here, if we look at it from a side view, this is your hydrogen atom. Ito yung connection nila. So there's negativity on this side. And the other end of your hydrogen would have a positive end. However, your oxygen will still have negative ends on the other side of it. So basically, they are not mirror images of each other. They are asymmetric. And thus, this is called a polar covalent bond. Clear?
Yes po,
Alright.
Doc. Clear po.
Sige, let's continue. Next, we have your hydrogen bonding. So hydrogen bond is actually the weakest of the three. It's weaker than your covalent and definitely weaker than your ionic. So what happens here? Yung polar molecules natin, like water, as mentioned, di ba meron siyang positive end and negative end. Again, I just want to remind you, polar molecules such as this one has a positive end and a negative end. So what happens in hydrogen bond is that the positive end of one polar molecule becomes attracted to the negative end of another polar molecule. So this is a good example. No, this one muna tayo. This is one water molecule, another water molecule, water molecule, water molecule, water molecule. No? So, kaya sila nagsasama-sama because your water molecule has both the positive and the negative end. So the negative end of one water molecule becomes attracted to the positive end of another water molecule. And when that happens, when polar compounds become attracted to each other, then you form hydrogen bonds. This is again exhibited by this image here. It has a negative and a positive end, and the positive end became attracted to the electrons on this molecule. So positive and negative polar compounds forms your hydrogen bonds. Okay? So now that we're done talking about bonds, we're done talking about the formation of different molecules, of different compounds, no? We need to be able to discuss what we mean by molecules and compounds. So here we go. Molecules are two or more atoms that are chemically bonded. while compounds are a chemical combination of two or more different types of atoms. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aren't they the same, Doc? Hindi ba pareho lang yung definition nila? Actually, yes. They are defined similarly. Okay? However, what sets compounds apart is that compounds are actually complete in their shape and are visible to the naked eye. Kompleto yung shape nila and they are visible to the naked eye. Thus, listen to this, guys. All compounds are molecules. Kasi pareho lang sila. They are atoms that are chemically bonded. But not all molecules are compounds. Why? Because not all molecules are complete in shape and are visible to the naked eye. Okay? So basically, when you have two or more atoms that are bonded together, and when they are complete in shape and visible to the naked eye, we call that a compound. And when we have two or more atoms that are bonded, and they are incomplete in shape and are invisible to the naked eye, we call it a molecule. Okay? Again, all compounds are molecules, but not all molecules are compounds. So now that we're done talking about bonding or the union of these atoms and substances, now let's talk about dissolving them. And we call this dissociation. Dissociation. So when ionic compounds, so compounds na, ibig sabihin, they are already bound together. When ionic compounds are dissolved in water, they dissociate from each other. What was the ionic compound? We gave us an example earlier. Your sodium chloride or your salt. So when you dissolve salt in water, sodium and chloride actually dissociates or they separate from one another. Because the positively charged ion, which is sodium in this case, becomes attracted to the negative ends of your water molecules, while the negatively charged ions, which is chloride in this case, becomes attracted to the positive ends of the water molecules. So I will show you an image later just to prove the point. But these dissociated ions, when they are dissolved in water, they are now called electrolytes. Okay, they are now called electrolytes. Similar to Gatorade, di ba? Gatorade is an electrolyte drink. So, the main formulary or kung paano sila nagagawa is that ionic compounds are dissolved in water and then given flavor. And poof, you have your Gatorade already. What's special about your electrolyte is that they can conduct an electrical current. No? Pag pinadaan mo ang kuryente dyan sa electrolyte or sa tubig na merong ions, it will be able to carry the current. So let me show you an image in order for you to better visualize. So we have here your water and your salt, which is an ionic compound. This is your salt crystal, and once it comes in contact with water, dissociation will happen. Sodium will become attracted to the negative ends of your water, which is on the oxygen side, di ba? While chloride, which is negatively charged, becomes attracted to the positive ends of water, which is on the hydrogen. So, when water contains these dissociated ions, it becomes electrolytes. Now, bonding, dissociation, all of this stuff we've been talking about actually falls under the term chemical reactions, because chemical reactions are the formation or the breaking of chemical bonds between atoms, between ions, molecules, or even compounds. No? So chemical reaction can be formation, it can also be the breaking. And in any chemical reaction, there are two important parts. These are your reactants and your products. So reactants are usually those that enter into the reaction, while products are the result of a certain reaction. So basically, your reactants are the raw materials, while product is the finished product. Okay? So in any chemical reaction, these two should be present. So let's talk about the different types of chemical reactions. There are three types of chemical reactions. You have your synthesis, decomposition, and exchange reaction. So yung pinag-usapan natin kanina na chemical bond, it will fall under synthesis. And then the one we talked about called dissociation would fall under decomposition. So when we say synthesis, the goal is to build a new molecule. Okay, the goal of the reaction is to build a new molecule. However, in most synthesis reactions, they are energy requiring. Kailangan nila ng energy para mangyari yung formation ng bagong substance, ng bagong molecule. On the other hand, we have decomposition. And in decomposition, this is the breaking down of a molecule. So kung sa synthesis, you build or you create a new one, in decomposition, you actually destroy the molecule. And in most decomposition reactions, it is energy releasing. Meaning, naglalabas siya ng energy habang binibreak down mo yung substances. And then lastly, we have your exchange reaction, which is the combination of both synthesis and decomposition reactions. But actually, what happens here is that they just exchange their components. So if we tune our eyes here, AB plus CD is equals to AC plus BD, we notice that they just interchanged yung kanilang mga ingredients, no? Naging AC na and naging BD na. Nagpalit-palit lang sila. Another example here is your HCl and NaOH. So basically, they just exchange partners here. So that's what we mean by an exchange reaction. Now, in any chemical reaction, whether it be synthesis, decomposition, or exchange, pwede silang reversible or irreversible. What do we mean by reversible reactions? Anybody? Yes, Dr. Inigo Martin.
Yung ano po sir, yung usually po kasi from reactant side, pwede po maging product side. Pero pag reversible po yung product side, pwede pong ma-revert into reactant side po. Parang mapagpapalit-balit po yung process, interchangeable po.
Very good. That's actually the correct definition, no? Reversible reactions occur when a reaction can run both in the forward and in the backward or the opposite direction. So when you can convert your reactants into products and products into reactants, then the reaction is called reversible. And commonly, reversible reactions are in equilibrium. So dito papasok yung word na equilibrium, hindi sa homeostasis. When we say equilibrium, the rate of product equals the rate of reactant formation. Meaning, kung ilan yung components ng reactants mo, dapat ganun din karami yung components ng product mo. And kung ilan yung components ng product mo, dapat ganun din karami yung components ng reactants mo. So let's take a look if we have equilibrium here. How many carbon do we see in the reactants? Can you type it in the chat box, please? How many carbon do we see in the reactants? One. And how many carbon do we see in the products? One pa din. Diba? So yun yung ibig natin sabihin by equilibrium. Kung ilan siya sa reactant, dapat yun pa rin siya sa product. So how many oxygen do we have here in the reactant? 2 here, and then another one here. So 3. Diba? 1, 2, 3. And how many oxygen do we have in the products? 3 pa din. Yeah. Same with your hydrogen. How many hydrogens do we have? 2. And in the product, how many do we have? 1 and 2. So kung ilan siya dito, yun din siya dito. And that's what we mean by equilibrium. Any questions so far, guys, before we continue?
None po, sir.
Great. Mukhang clear naman so far. All right. So all of these chemical reactions, they actually do not occur spontaneously. Before they can occur, it needs a trigger. And commonly, that trigger is fuel or energy. So let's talk about energy. Energy is the capacity to do work. So when one substance has energy, then there is a capability. It has the capability to actually do work. And what do we mean by work? Work is the moving of matter. Okay? So when we say when one substance has energy, that substance is capable of moving matter. Okay? Now, when the matter is not moving, the energy is stored in that substance. And we call it potential energy. But once energy, yeah, is moving already or is in motion, then we call it kinetic energy. Okay, this is again just a review of your high school science. Now, how will this be important for the body? Let's look. It will be important because in the body, energy is stored in the form of chemical energy. Okay, it is the potential energy stored in chemical bonds. So your ionic, your hydrogen, and your covalent bonds actually have energy in them. Okay, they actually have energy in them. And as mentioned, these reactions, like your synthesis and decomposition kanina, they may require or they may release energy. Diba? So, if the potential energy, you have to listen to this, medyo confusing to, if the potential energy of the reactant is less than the energy of the product, then it will require energy. Kuha? Kung mababa daw yung energy ng reactants at ang product na gusto mong i-produce ay high energy, then kailangan mo ng dagdag na energy input sa reactants mo. On the other hand, if the potential energy of the reactant is more than that of the products, then you have to release energy. In Tagalog, kung mataas naman yung energy ng reactants mo, pero dapat mababa lang yung energy ng product mo, kailangan mo magbawas or mag-release ng energy. Okay? Clear ba yun so far? So don't worry, I'll be showing an image also for you to better understand what I mean by that. So let's have this as an example. So an example of that is the chemical reaction that uses energy in order to produce ATP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So ang adenosine triphosphate, guys, is created from ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, and P, which is a phosphate group. So ang ATP kasi, I want to introduce to you ATP. ATP is a powerful source of energy. So high energy ang ATP. So basically, mababa yung energy ng ADP and phosphate mo para ma-produce yung powerful source of energy, which is ATP. So since the power of the reactants, since the energy of the reactants is less than the product, it will need additional energy. So here in this formula, you see ADP plus phosphate, and then it will require energy from food, will produce your ATP. Okay? So if we need ATP in order to sustain the body's processes, then we should also be eating food. Kasi from food, we'll be able to get our energy to help produce ATP. Okay? So ATP, yan ang major source of energy na ginagamit ng cells natin, ng tissues natin, at ng iba't ibang mga biochemical processes inside the body. So actually, ATP, tinatawag din nila yan na currency of energy of the cell. So when you talk about energy in the body, ang usapan is always ATP. So next example, yan. When we talk about the breakdown naman, so we know that ATP is a powerful source of energy. And now you want to break it down into ADP and phosphate. So you should be able to release energy, right? So ATP will produce ADP and phosphate, plus it will release energy. So this is what happens in the cells of the body. Ginagamit ng cells natin ng ATP at kino-convert nila into ADP and phosphate para magamit nila tong energy na nare-release. Okay? Yan ang nangyayari. ATP is broken down to get the energy that will be released. Okay? So kailangan natin ng energy from food to create ATP because ATP will produce the energy needed by the cells. So here is another example of what I was trying to discuss with you. ADP is of lesser potential energy compared to the product. Thus, it will require energy here. And for the other way around, ATP has more potential energy. Thus, if we want to produce a smaller or a less potential energy, energy should be released. Okay? So last part of the first part of the discussion. Let's talk about the rate of chemical reactions. So when we talk about rate, ito yung bilis ng chemical reaction, no? So ang bilis daw or the rate of chemical reactions are influenced by several factors, such as your catalyst, which I will later on discuss, the concentration of reactants, and temperature. So remember these three. These are the ones that influence the rate of reaction: catalyst, concentration of reactants, and temperature. So what are catalysts? Catalysts increases the rate of reaction without itself being permanently changed or depleted. Sa madaling sabi, in Tagalog, pinapabilis niya yung reaction, pinapabilis niyang mangyari yung reaction. Pero si catalyst, walang nangyayari sa kanya. Hindi siya nadadigest, hindi siya nababawasan, hindi siya nagbabago. Yun lang yung ginagawa niya. It just hastens or increases the rate of reaction. Now, one example of your catalyst are enzymes. Kaya we have so many enzymes in the body because their goal or their role rather is to act as a protein catalyst that will increase the rate of reactions within the body. Now, if you'll ask me, Doc, how are enzymes or how is a catalyst able to do that? How does it hasten or increase the rate of reaction? Well, it does that by lowering the activation energy needed to start the reaction. So let me show you a diagram that will make you understand it here. So let's talk about this one first, the high one. So the vertical axis shows the amount of energy, and the horizontal axis shows the progress of the reaction. So as we can see here, the upper line shows us the progress of reaction without any enzymes. So if you will see, it will require a lot of energy. No? This amount of energy is required from this line, or rather from this line up until the peak. Kanyang karaming energy yung need niya. But if you have an enzyme or a catalyst, it will lower the activation energy. So instead of requiring this much energy here, it will bring it down to this part only. So ano mangyayari kung mababa yung activation energy, mas mabilis mapoproduce yung products. Diba? Mas mabilis mapoproduce yung products. Next, concentration of reactants. So the higher the concentration of reactants, the faster the rate. So ako, the way I understand this, I try to imagine a shoe factory. So ano bang mga raw ingredients ng shoes? Kailangan mo ng rubber, kailangan mo ng leather, kailangan mo ng lace, kailangan mo ng thread, kailangan mo ng insoles, diba? You need all of those raw materials in order to create the final product, which is the shoes. Now, if there are a lot or high concentration of raw materials, then you'll be able to create more shoes in a faster amount of time, diba? But if you have less raw materials or less ingredients, then it will also take a long time for you to finish the needed amount of shoes. So for example, again, if the manufacturer tells you we need to produce 100 shoes today, if you have all the materials in high concentration, then you'll be able to finish the 100 shoes in a matter of a few hours. But if you have only a few rubber, a few leather, a few lace, a few insoles, or whatever, pag kulang yung raw materials or ingredients, mas matagal din bago mapoproduce yung 100 shoes mo. Okay? So the higher the concentration of reactants, the faster the rate. And lastly, temperature. Similar to cooking, the higher the temperature for cooking, the faster maluluto yung food mo. So same with chemical reactions. The higher the temp, the faster the rate. So last part are your acids and bases. But this is naman not anymore new for you. When we say acid, they have a pH of below 7. And when we say base, they have a pH of above 7. Now, what dictates the pH of a substance? What dictates is the amount of hydrogen atom. Okay? Pagkaunti ang hydrogen atom, acid. Pag maraming hydrogen atom, base. Why is that? Because acid is a proton donor. It's a hydrogen donor. So bigay ng bigay si acid ng hydrogen. Kaya dahil nauubusan siya ng hydrogen, bumababa yung pH niya. On the other hand, si base tanggap ng hydrogen. And the more hydrogen you have, the more basic or the higher pH you will have. So here is a good image also showing you that. So distilled water has a neutral pH of 7. Blood is slightly basic at 7.4. And then it goes on, no? Yung mga bleach, yung mga ammonia, sodium hydroxide, lahat yan basic na kasi marami silang hydrogen. And those that are acidic, sila naman yung mga walang hydrogen. Coffee, tomatoes, cola, lemon, stomach acid, and hydrochloric acid. Diba? Okay, so any questions so far? None? There you go. All right, let's continue. Now let's talk about inorganic and organic chemistry. So why is there an organic and inorganic chemistry? Kasi the substances that are dealt in each type of chemistry are different. When we say inorganic chemistry, these are substances that do not contain carbon. Okay? Pag inorganic, walang carbon. And that is the opposite for organic chemistry. When we talk about organic chemistry, you deal with substances that contain carbon. But there is an exception. There are some carbon-containing compounds that are not organic. Why? Because they do not contain hydrogen. That is why, katulad na lang ng carbon dioxide. That is why when you say organic chemistry, you should be dealing with hydrocarbons. So carbons with or containing hydrogen. So yan ang organic chemistry. Carbon and hydrogen. Kaya tinawag sila na hydrocarbons. If it has carbon but is not coupled with a hydrogen atom, it is still inorganic. So let's talk about some inorganic atoms and compounds first, or molecules rather. Of course, we have oxygen. Oxygen is a small, nonpolar, pag sinabi nating nonpolar, equal sharing of electrons, and they are inorganic molecules. The bond between these two oxygen atoms is a double covalent bond. And oxygen is very important for most living organisms because oxygen is used as an ingredient to produce ATP or your energy. On the other hand, we have carbon dioxide. So although it has a carbon, it is still considered an inorganic molecule because it does not have hydrogen. So it is a carbon atom bound to two oxygen atoms. And your carbon dioxide is produced after metabolizing or after digestion of food molecules. Kaya our body continually produces carbon dioxide and we should continually expel or excrete carbon dioxide out of the body. Kasi Nanggagaling yung carbon dioxide from digestion or metabolism of food molecules. Another important inorganic compound is your water or H2O. And by this point, we already know that it is a polar molecule. There is asymmetrical or unequal sharing of electrons. And we saw that it is the bonding of two hydrogen atoms to an oxygen atom by a polar covalent bond. And as we saw earlier, yung water natin, it has a positive and a negative side. Now, sinabi rin natin during the discussion of hydrogen bonding that some molecules become attracted, no, to the positive and to the negative aspects of your polar molecules. And when molecules are attracted to water, we basically call them hydrophilic. Hydrophilic. So in order for you to remember, hydrophil, it likes water. L, it likes water. And the other term for molecules that are not attracted to water or to those molecules that repel water, they are called hydrophobic. So from the word phobia. No? So water is important because it has several functions. It stabilizes your body temperature. Like for example, when the body is too hot, like when we have fever, or when we just came from a run or from exercise. In order to lower the body temperature, what the body will ask for is to demand for water. And once you drink your water or once you have already taken a bath, your body temperature will start to go down and it will stabilize your body temperature. Another function of water is that it protects the body. When the body is well hydrated, viruses and other disease-causing organisms does not easily penetrate our immune system. Water is also required for many chemical reactions. And of course, water is important for the transport of substances in the different parts of the body. Now let's talk about organic molecules. So we're nearing the end of our discussion already. Organic molecules again deal with hydrocarbons, carbons that are coupled with your hydrogen. So why is there a chemistry solely devoted for carbon? Because carbon has the ability to form covalent bonds with many other atoms, allowing it to form large and diverse and complicated molecules needed for life. Kaya meron siyang special chemistry called organic chemistry because carbon has a very special ability, no, to form bonds with many other atoms. And there are four major groups of organic molecules that are needed to sustain life. And these are your carbohydrates, your lipids, your proteins, and your nucleic acids. We're going to talk about them one by one, starting off with carbohydrates. So when I was still a medtech student, I would remember my professor, Dr. Rabor, and he would call carbohydrates as CHO, C-H-O. And somehow it helped us remember that the ingredients of carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. CHO. For a while, guys, I have to take a call. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, let's call from now on carbohydrates as CHO. And what's special about carbohydrates, I mean the CHO, is that there is a 2:1 ratio of your hydrogen and oxygen. So for every 2 hydrogens, there should be 1 oxygen. It's just like this one, C6H12O6. So by applying the 2:1 ratio, since there are 12 hydrogens, then there should be 6 oxygens. Now, this ratio is very important because as you will see later, let me just go to that slide, you will find out that lipids are also composed of CHO, but there is no more 2:1 ratio. Okay? So both are made up of CHO, but what's special about carbohydrates is that it has a 2:1 ratio. Now, each type of organic molecule, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, they have a building block. And the building block of your carbohydrates are called monosaccharides. So from the prefix mono, it means one. So monosaccharides are simple sugars. It contains only one sugar. And examples of that includes your glucose and your fructose. So let me show you chemical um, their chemical composition. So as you can see here, everything is just CHO, 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 CHO. Your glucose is the sugar that is found in the blood. Your galactose, the one that is found in dairy products, and fructose, the one that you find in fruits. So the difference between the three is, of course, yung placement ng double bond. So iba-iba sila ng placement ng double bond, the number of carbons, the number of hydrogens, and the number of oxygens. No? So that these are the building blocks of your carbohydrates. Now, when you have two sugars together, it's called disaccharide. So from the prefix di, it means two. So when you add glucose and fructose together, you will form sucrose. And sucrose is your table sugar. Okay? Glucose plus fructose equals sucrose, which is the table sugar. And then when you add glucose and galactose, you form lactose, which is the milk sugar. Diba? And there are people who cannot digest lactose. That's why you call them lactose intolerant. Okay? And lastly, when you have a combination of if you have a combination of mono and di and many other sugars, then you'll be able to form a polysaccharide. And from the prefix poly, it means many. So commonly, ito na yung mga complicated sugars such as your starch, your grain, your vegetables, and your glycogen. So we'll be talking about a few of this. Let's start with, but before that, let's talk about the functions. Okay. First function of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates provide some parts of other organic molecules. So later, kapag inaral natin yung nucleic acids, you will find out that in order to create a nucleic acid, it needs a sugar. So a carbohydrate, that's one of its functions. It provides, it is an ingredient in other organic molecules. Okay? Next, carbohydrates provide energy. But the energy that it provides is usually short-term only. That's why when you drink something sweet, it makes you wake up. No? So for those who are sleepy right now, try to eat something sweet. Definitely it will wake you up because it will provide you energy. Okay? And when carbohydrates are undigested, then they provide bulk in our poop. They provide fiber in our feces. So going to the examples of my polysaccharides, we have glycogen. Glycogen is found in your muscles, in your brain, in your liver. Why? Because it is the main storage form of glucose in humans. So glycogen should be found in the parts of the body that actually need a fast supply of glucose, like your muscles. In order for it to be able to contract, then there should be continuous supply of energy. Like the brain, there should be continuous supply of energy to the brain. So glycogen is stored in many different parts of the body. and it contains a lot of glucose. So glycogen can be broken down into simple sugars that will produce ATP. Another example are starch and cellulose. So starch, we commonly find this in rice, in bread, and we eat and we digest starch in order to create ATP. On the other hand, cellulose naman is a polysaccharide found in plants. So humans cannot digest cellulose, but it provides the fiber necessary in our diet. Just like your corn and your malunggay. When you eat corn and when you eat malunggay, when you poop it out, it's still corn and it's still malunggay. Why was it not digested? Because it contains cellulose and we cannot digest cellulose. So what happens is that they become part of of the fiber, of the bulk of our feces. Okay? So again, now you know why you cannot digest corn and malunggay, because they contain cellulose. Next, we have lipids. Any questions about carbohydrates? None. Okay. Next, let's talk about lipids. Lipids again contain your CHO, but there is no more 2:1 ratio. In terms of oxygen, mas kaunti din yung oxygen nila compared to carbohydrates. So, hindi na siya 2:1, di ba? Pwedeng 2:0.5, 2:0.3, ganun na lang siguro. So, but anyway, lower proportion of oxygen. Also, lipids are insoluble in water. And look at the examples of your lipids. Fat, oil, cholesterol, triglycerides, phospholipids. Di ba? You cannot mix water with oil. It cannot dissolve in water. So basically, your lipids are fats and they are insoluble in water. If carbohydrates, building blocks are monosaccharides, then the building blocks of your lipids are glycerol and fatty acids. Function of lipids. So compared to carbohydrates, yes, lipids provide energy, but not only that, it has a longer effect on the body. It's a long-term energy storage. Also, fat or lipids insulate against heat loss. Kaya di ba pag medyo on the chubbier side ka or the healthier side ka, hindi ka basta-basta nalalamigan because the body is prevented from losing heat. Also, your lipids or your fats provide a cushion for your organs, and cholesterol is actually an important part of the cell membrane, which you will study on Wednesday or next week. There are two types of lipids. I'm sure you've heard of this. Your saturated fat and unsaturated fat. So saturated fat are actually those with single covalent bonds, while unsaturated fat are those with one or more double covalent bonds. So that's the only difference between the two, the number of bonds and the type of bond. So single saturated, unsaturated, unli. Unli kasi ang dami, one or more double covalent bonds. So here is just a diagram showing you the building blocks. So in this one, this entire structure is called triglycerides. Why triglycerides? Because it has 3 glycerols. 1, 2, 3. These are all glycerol groups. And there are 3 glycerols attached to a fatty acid chain. So 3 glycerols and 3 fatty acid chains. So building block niyan ng mga lipids natin. Another type of lipid which will be important for when you discuss your cell anatomy is a phospholipid. A phospholipid has 2 parts. The phosphate head, just the blue one, and the fatty acid chain, which are the legs. Okay? What's special about the phosphate head is that it is polar. Pag sinabi natin polar, it is hydrophilic. It loves water. While your fatty acid chain, being a lipid, di ba? Fatty acid is a building block of lipids. it hates water. It is hydrophobic. No, it is hydrophobic. So yan yung component ng cells natin, which you will study next week. Any questions about lipids? Yes, Dr. Martin.
Sir, curious lang po, ba't daw po mas masama po yung saturated fat kesa sa unsaturated fat? May po ba idea po kayo po?
Actually, not necessarily true naman that saturated fat are more dangerous, no? It's just that your single covalent bonds are harder to break compared to your double covalent bonds. So, mas mabilis na digest ng body natin yung mga unsaturated food natin. Weird, no? But yeah. Pero not necessarily true na sila, unhealthy sila. Yun. May mga healthy rin na saturated fat. Alright, let's go to proteins. Proteins naman, they are called CHON. So CHO, but now with nitrogen. The building blocks of proteins are your amino acids. And there are 20 different naturally occurring amino acids, which you will study in your biochemistry. Now, amino acids contain an amine group which is composed of nitrogen and 2 hydrogen atoms, and a carboxyl group composed of carbon and 2 oxygen groups. Okay? And what's important for you to remember is that amino acids are not stored in the body. Rather, there should be a daily supply of these amino acids through the diet. Okay? So, hindi nag-store ang body natin ng amino acids. Kailangan daily na susuplayan yan. Okay? So, here is an example of your protein. So, this entire structure is actually already a protein. Again, there is an amine group, NH2, and then your COO or your carboxyl group. And then all these colored circles here are amino acids. Yes, Shek?
Ay, sir, sorry po. Wala po.
Okay lang. So all of these encircled colored things are amino acids. So actually ito, hindi ito random arrangement ha. Bakit kaya dinrawing siya ng pagganyan-ganyan? So ang mga proteins natin, they really have a specific configuration. Okay? They have a specific configuration. So ganyan talaga yung shape ng protein na yan. So proteins are important in the production of skin, of hair, nails, muscles. They are also part of your hemoglobin, which you will study in your hematology by 3rd year. They also act as enzymes. Remember, enzymes are protein catalysts. Proteins are also important in the immune system. Proteins are important for muscle contraction. And there are also proteins in the cell membrane, which you will study next week. Now, let's talk about protein denaturation. So, as mentioned, proteins are composed of amino acids. And what keeps these amino acids chained to each other are hydrogen bonds. Okay? What keeps them in shape is hydrogen bonding. So, what happens in protein denaturation is that you break down these hydrogen bonds. Sinisira mo yung hydrogen bonds in order to change the shape of the protein and to render the protein non-functional. So how do we do protein denaturation? By applying high temperature and pH. So as you can see here, we have uncooked proteins and they have a specific configuration, twisting, curly in appearance. But once heat is applied, the protein is broken down, the shape is broken down, and now they appear straight. Now, by raise of hand, I want to know, sino may kilala kay Miss Hart sa TikTok? Okay, so medyo kaunti lang nakakilala kay Miss Hart. So what is the relevance of Miss Hart in this discussion? Actually, protein denaturation is the process that is being used in rebonding of hair. Kaya nga, rebonding. You destroy the hydrogen bond with the use of a high pH chemical, yung nilalagay ni Miss Hart na chemical, and then, paplansyahin niya, ina-iron niya, high temperature. So what happens to that hair, you break down the hydrogen bond to destroy the shape of the protein, then you put a neutralizer to create a new bond that will support the straight hair. Okay? So, now we know. Now, one example of protein are your enzymes. And as mentioned, enzymes are protein catalysts, and the job of catalysts are to increase the rate of reaction by lowering the energy of activation. We're done with this already. Lastly, we have nucleic acids. Nucleic acids naman are composed of CHON-P. So we still have your carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and now we have phosphate. Two important nucleic acids are your DNA and RNA, which carry our genetic information, right? So what are the building blocks of your nucleic acids? Nucleotides. And nucleotides are composed of a nitrogen base, a phosphate, and a sugar. If you remember earlier, I said one of the functions of carbohydrates is that it becomes an ingredient for other organic compounds. And here we see that it is an important ingredient in the formation of your nucleotides. So here is the structure of your DNA. So the purple bar here is your phosphate, another phosphate on the other part. Itong parang pentagon, that's your sugar or ribose. And itong parang mga hexagon dito, these are your nitrogen base. So actually, if we take the phosphate, the sugar, and the nitrogen base, this is one nucleotide. So when you put nucleotides together, then you'll be able to create a nucleic acid. And in this case, this is a DNA. Lastly, we have your ATP or adenosine triphosphate. As mentioned, ATP is an important energy source for all living organisms, and it is composed of adenosine and triphosphate groups. But what is adenosine? Adenosine is actually a sugar, again, a sugar named ribose together with an organic base called adenine. So adenine plus ribose, adenosine. Okay? And ATP is the energy currency of cells because it is capable of storing and providing energy. So here we see adenine, the pentagon, you see the pentagon again, and then you see the adenine base. Sorry, this is the pentagon rather, then you see the adenine base here, plus 3 phosphates, then that's your ATP. And that's the end of the lecture. Any questions?